Formative versus Summative Assessments as Measures of Student Learning by Robert J. Marzano. The birth of the No Child Left Behind Act raised the emphasis on assessing and reporting student academic achievement to new levels. Since this act relied on schools reporting student academic achievement, a new focus on reporting student achievement emerged. While NCLB has created an emphasis on assessment, a status-oriented, summatively based approach has been the default for many educators. This type of approach reflects the percentage of students who are at specific levels of achievement. Theoretically, a district or school should have or at least approach 100% of students passing every state test at every grade level. While the logic behind a summatively based status approach might be understandable, is it the best approach to measure student learning? Marzano answers this question with a resounding no. Marzano points out a variety of reasons that summative assessments don't measure up. First, many districts and schools have high transient populations. If this is the case, the percent of students at or above a specific criterion score on a summative assessment might be more a function of the stability of the student population than it is the effectiveness of the district or school. Second, districts and schools have student populations with very different demographics, and those demographic differences are strongly related to differences in student achievement. Third, summatively based approaches can drain resources from the classroom. Resources include instructional time and money. Experts estimate that the cost of testing under NCLB ranged between $271 million and $757 million for the years 2002 through 2008. Finally, status systems that are based on large-scale summative assessments are not designed to be used to help individual students. They do not provide feedback on specific aspects of knowledge and skill within a subject area. For these reasons, Barton has called for an accountability system built on value-added or growth model. If we had an accountability system that truly measured student gains, sometimes called growth or value-added, we could use whether students in any year have gained enough in that school year to show adequate progress. The role of formative assessment is supported by a considerable amount of research. A study conducted by Black and William concluded that formative assessment does improve student learning. A value-added approach that is based on formative assessments appears to address many of the shortcomings of a summatively based status approach. First, it addresses the issue of different transiency rates in that a school could estimate the unique effect it had on a student's learning regardless of when a student entered school. Second, a formatively based value-added system also addresses the issue of different demographics. A school with a majority of students from higher income homes will most likely have a greater proportion of students at or above a specified level of proficiency than a school with a majority of students from low-income families. The knowledge gain in the low-income school might be greater than that in the higher-income school. Third, a formatively based value-added system might even address some of the resource problems of a status system because it relies on classroom assessments that do not detract from instructional time, as do the high-stakes state-level tests that are characteristic of status approaches. And finally, a formatively based value-added system addresses the characteristic inability of large-scale status systems to provide guidance regarding instructional practices for individual students. So, if formative assessments are the answer, how should they be implemented? Some districts and schools use the off-the-shelf formative assessments developed by standardized test makers. Popham criticizes the use of commercially prepared formative assessments, stating that test publishers suddenly began to relabel many of their tests as formative. By definition, formative assessment must be tied to classroom instruction. A similar criticism might be leveled at district-made formative assessments. Specifically, they violate one basic tenet of formative assessment, which is that they must allow for both formal and informal judgments of student achievement. Therefore, benchmark assessments are not formative assessments. Black and William defined formative assessment in the following way: all those activities undertaken by teachers and/or by students which provide information to be used as feedback to modify the teaching and learning activities in which they are engaged. According to William and Leahy, an assessment is formative to the extent that information from the assessment is fed back within the system and actually used to improve the performance of the system in some way. While many teachers are utilizing a 100-point scale for assignments, this scale has proved to be insufficient to the task of effective formative assessment. When teachers design assessments using the 100-point scale, each scale for each assessment will likely be very different due to the differential weighting of items. So, how does a teacher move away from the 100-point scale? One way is the item response theory. This model is based on a continuum of latent scores and then mathematically estimates each student's score on the latent continuum. While this sounds interesting, there are some drawbacks. Then, why not IRT? For starters, while it is theoretically possible to use IRT models for formative assessment, it would require a tremendous amount of time and money and is therefore not practical. Secondly, formative assessment based on IRT models provide no information that could guide teachers and students regarding teaching and learning. Marzano offers a more flexible option to designing IRT-based formative assessments by suggesting a continuum of knowledge. This continuum offers a scale as a tool for articulating partial knowledge in any given subject area. The scales included in this chapter is a 4-point scale where 0 represents no knowledge of a given topic, a score of 1 indicates with help the student shows partial knowledge, a different identifier is added at each point on the scale representing student knowledge in a given area. A score of 4.0 indicates that the student demonstrates applications that go beyond what was taught in class. If teachers use a scale to articulate a continuum of knowledge as outlined in this chapter on a regular basis, tracking student progress becomes quite easy. The teacher simply uses the scale to chart where the student achieves on the continuum over a period of time. This chart then becomes a good record of student progress. This concludes the summary of the chapter on formative versus summative assessment as measures of student learning.